that kind of summarizes this and we're done. Then, I think this is the hardest step, is distinguishing that there's two different aggregations. When you think of platelet adhesion, it is vessel to platelet. So if that helps you to write, vessel to platelet. You're getting that first level of platelets trying to block that open damage in the vessel wall. Okay? Aggregation is when you get platelet to platelet. They're trying to get a big glob of platelets to cross-link and build that plug so you can minimize the bleeding until the clot can join it from the factors, clotting factors. If it's a deeper vessel. What we did the other day with the bleeding time, you only needed vessels and platelets. You didn't need any clotting factors to stop that. Superficial. Okay, there's two things. You only have to give me one for your test. Okay? There's two things that happen in primary aggregation. GP2B and GP3A do bridges with calcium and fibrinogen. Factor 1, its name is fibrinogen. So until you understand the clotting factors, maybe write 1 and then fibrinogen underneath it, because you need to know the names. Okay, so two key glycoproteins from the transmitter or peripheral zone for platelets to bridge to each other and join that first wave on the vessel wall are GP2B3A, and they do cross links with calcium and factor 1, and they do platelet to platelet to stabilize this platelet plug. This is the key piece to platelet plug formation. You got to have good aggregation. And what do we need to release to get some of those substances? What's the alpha granules have? They had VWF, factor 1, factor 5. What do dense granules have? ADP, ATP, calcium. Besides you have factor 1 and calcium in your bloodstream, the granules, when they release them, also have more. This is a big deal, the second piece. Remember we said the sol gel contracts and forces out the granules through that canal, the OCS? Well, you gotta have a substance that makes it contract. And there's a substance called thromboxane A2. We call it TXA2. And I'm fine if you know it as TXA2. You have a substance in your membrane wall that you don't have to know for the test, called arachidonic acid. When the platelet is activated, this goes through multiple steps to form TXA2 when it's acted on. And remember I told you I'd teach you how aspirin affects? A key enzyme to make this is cyclooxygenase. And you gotta know this. This is the key enzyme that helps you to form TXA2. Why do you need TXA2? Without it, you don't release your granules. So, I don't care on your test. If you remember these easier, just give me GP2B3A, calcium and fibrinogen to go platelet to platelet. Or if you can remember the formation of TXA2. I don't care, whichever one is easier for you to remember, but this is a big deal. If you don't get this formed when platelets start joining the platelets, you're never going to release your granules. And remember, you don't have good platelet plug formation unless your granules are released. Why? What isn't enough if you don't release it from the dense granules? Well, the energy is the biggest thing. If you don't get ADP and ATP from your dense granules, that platelet plug is not going to last. Okay? So this is a key piece why I separate out my primary and secondary. And that book, Harmony, I think is the best way of the books I've read them on explaining it. So if I take aspirin, guess what I wipe out? Cyclooxygenase. So what's not going to happen? Primary aggregation, no release reaction, you're going to bleed. They should be off aspirin the whole week before they have surgery. This is something I would know. I've seen that on a registered question, how does aspirin work? And it affects the cyclooxygenase. Okay, so you can pick either one of those things for your test. You only have to give me one. Okay, so you already know one of your essay questions. Okay, yes?
Okay, just so I got this right. You need TXA2 to release granules, and granules need to be released to...
What do you get in alpha? What do you get in the alpha granules? VWF. What does VWF have? Platelet adhesion, right? Lining platelets to the vessel wall. And then what else was released? Factor 1, factor 5, those are extra clotting factors. We know we see one is needed in platelet to platelet aggregation. And then dense granules, what do they release?
ATP and ADP.
And without the extra energy, that platelet plug isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to dissolve. You have to have the energy from the release reaction. The little bit of ADP when the vessel is damaged isn't good enough. Okay? And then what else is in the dense granules that's extra? The calcium. One of the things I want to, there's another system, you don't have to know this for a test, called the dense tubular system, and this is responsible for releasing the calcium. So you don't have to know that for me for anything, but if you read the book, there's another canal called the DTS, not just the OCS. Okay? So keep in mind, this is critical. You gotta have TXA2 formed, or you're never gonna have full platelet plug formation. So 3 is the release reaction. This is what triggers it. Besides glycoproteins, there's also platelet factors on the membrane. I primarily have you know one, PF3. So, 2 things happen. You release the alpha and dense. That's a big one. So if you want to put that on your test because it makes sense, you got to release those granules. But a bigger thing for the fibrin clot to ultimately join the platelet plug, platelet factor 3 is exposed and this becomes critical in your last step. So on your test, you only have to give me one of these. And I think you'll all at least be able to remember that. It'll release the alpha and dense granules. Okay? And this is why you have to have 2 steps of aggregation. Is primary aggregation good enough to keep the platelet plug? Do you have the release reaction at primary aggregation yet? No. What do you need from primary aggregation to make a good platelet plug? The energy from the dense granules. So you have to realize there is secondary aggregation. And it's probably the easiest one. All you do is have a more complete aggregation of platelet to platelet because of the granule contents. It's just a better platelet to platelet interaction. So all you have to do on the test is say more incomplete platelet to platelet aggregation. Remember, adhesion is platelet to vessel. Aggregation is platelet to platelet. Okay? That's all you got to say for secondary. And then the last one is stabilization. Now, initially, when we did the bleeding time, did we need clotting factors to join that little bleed? Superficial on the capillary? No. So we didn't have to stabilize that platelet plug. It stopped the bleeding well enough with the vessel and platelets. But when you have a good venous bleed, that platelet plug will not hold. You have to have something on the platelets exposed that your fibrin clot from, like when we do a protime, that forms a fibrin clot with your clotting factors. You have to have something on the platelet membrane the fibrin clot can join to and kind of mesh in like glue. And they call that the PF3 that was exposed up here has platelet join fibrin clot. So it's like after the release reaction, all the platelets have these little receptors, PF3, and they say, come on, fibrin clot, join to me, join to me. And if you don't have that PF3 exposed, you're not going to have a place for the clotting factors to join to. Remember, what system do we get activated right away when the vessel is damaged? What was the clotting factor? The clotting factor. It was factor 3, right? You know, that's our protime. That's our shortest fibrin clot formation, the extrinsic system. Okay? So, this was, I thought, a pretty good picture in your book. So, first you have tissue injury. Okay? Then you have the subendothelial tissue of the endothelial cells. Collagen is a big thing that's exposed. You're going to have the VWF from the subendothelial tissue bind to what? Glycoprotein from the platelet. GP1B. Okay? We'll keep practicing. Then, what triggers the shape change? What is released from the damaged vessel that activates the platelets? Well, that doesn't activate the platelets, the energy. ADP. So then what zone causes the shape change, gets ready to contract. Cell gel. And then, do you see how now more platelets are joining? So initially it's platelet to vessel. Then it's platelet to platelet. And they're trying to bridge. And this is just showing that secretion occurs so you get everything you need from the alpha and dense. And then you get the good platelet plug. So, and then when we go through the study questions, you'll see, we'll repeat everything. So we'll review a lot. You know, coag is tough because you don't really have anything you've had before. Most of you have never heard of anything prior to this other than maybe platelets and number. But have you heard of fibrin clots, clotting factors?
Yeah.
Have you heard of intrinsic systems in anatomy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I take Miss Vampy
fibrin.
Well, that's awesome.
Because 150
Yeah,
yeah.
just did it
Yeah,
before we
yeah.
had got off the plane, before we started last semester.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So is any of it familiar?
We didn't, cause
Kinda.
I'm waiting out,
Kinda.
I've heard of them.
That's awesome.
We didn't go
I have
into
never
it.
really had a class say they've had ever anything much in anatomy.
We talked a little bit about clots.
With any of the systems,
We just talked about, we talked about like fibrin analysis.
well, the fibrin and clot is our next system.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
And then
just got
fibrin
to
will-
learn about like something like when it's damaged and stuff, we just knew the steps of how like it happened. But we
Yeah,
didn't know what was
because-
Much more detail than here, obviously. but-
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, then what we'll get to, and as you read your text, you see I'm streamlining it. Coag there's just not a lot for people to relate to. Okay, I guess that was my last slide. So let's if you want to go get a drink, go to the bathroom, and we're going to go through the study questions. And then we'll review again, okay? And we're going to see what you know without using notes. So I'll put up who goes with who on what question. So I don't care if you look it over, but we're going to try to see what you retained and then we'll review it again, okay? I think if you're a more active learner, you'll find ways to learn. You know, different ways help different people. Some people listen, some people can visualize. But I found that my ones who were the weaker on the test did better when we did review as a group. Because no one was made to feel bad. So, I mean, we're all trying to learn. So, let me get my study questions. And I'll put the key up tonight.
Is these the only two that we're gonna study at? I mean, on the test?
No,
Or we
we're
got
gonna
the
do,
third one?
we still have to do clotting factors. I'm gonna make you know your clotting factors for next test too. Because that's kind of a hard piece.
Isn't the test too?
Next Wednesday will be the test. Here it is. Okay, so. We'll put them up on the board, so you can look over. One will have TB and AS. Two will have JH and PR. Three will have, I think it's Deshaun. And see if I miss anybody. I did this last time, I missed people. CP. Four will have SL and LM, LEM. And then 5, I think it's Krista and K, oh, I did this again. KM, and then 6 will be the last 3. Who's left? Nicole. Oh, then I lied, wait a minute, this should have been ER. Steven should have been CP. And this should have been LE and KM. So CM, NM, and LO. Yeah. Since that's the hardest one, platelet plug, and you're gonna spread out. And you're going to, so look over your question, and you can't bring any notes with you. Okay? And we're gonna go through them again, and then we'll recap again. Because I find a lot of times going over and over and over and over when it's hard stuff helps. And you at least have two of you up there trying to remember. And we'll fill in the gaps, what you don't know. Okay? So you already know one of your essay questions. So when you and your partner think you're okay to go up, you can go up, but you can't bring any notes. So let's put the questions up. That way. We'll put the question where you go. Okay, one, what are key functions of the vessels? Jen, on your board behind you, write question number 5, just the question. Tiana, on your board behind you, write question number 6. Just the question. And I don't care if you go to your person. Oh, and I just erased it. Hope you guys remember. Remember, we're going to help you if you don't remember, so it's nothing you're going to get affected by. Oh, I think I like 3 and 4.
We can just write.
And I want both names of the zones. Okay. Zone, 5 steps.
Okay. Do you want a small description on 4 now?
On 4, I want you to give me, what is its purpose? For sure, and another name. Its second name. Yep, not just, I already gave you the names. I'll come away, out in the way. Yeah, so it's no big deal, you guys, if you mess up. We're a team, just trying to find a different way to. What should we do? Will they pay out?
Oh, sure.
Dr. Cease. Before you leave, National Institute of Education. education, because I already have a master's in science and education. And it is,
We just found out this weekend.
it's exciting.
So yeah, I'll get information. Before we leave.
Leave. And stay up by your question,
Organelle
guys.
Don't worry, while you're explaining. That's all right. Love those are.
Well, yeah, give me till next week. It's a great day, is the name. You just tired.
This is just one of the.
Oh, yeah, I did.
This morning for bus stop.
Oh, you're going to
I heard what you told me.
10 years ago, my high school teacher made me think it's like when you work out clothes, running to the 5K. So she's got like 4 here and 7 money.
And it says me down.
Yeah.
I'm 105. And 106 are guaranteed.
Right, like we went to Six
I
Flags
don't
on
want to
Friday.
free, I can't
I walked
guarantee
right 3 miles or
That's why I wanted to call somebody.
Yeah.
Because I'm sensitive, I'm so
Yeah.
firm about this.
And then
Yeah,
on
I know.
Saturday, we went for a walk, we walked
Honestly,
2 miles, and
all
yesterday
good
we went for a walk. And
And I at least
I even tried to do squats between that, so my legs was like, oh.
I didn't take this
On Facebook, yeah, the no soda squats, 20 squats every time you go pee.
She says, I'm allergic to latex.
Alex is in the shower like that, so I did 100 squats a day, and I bath with her.
I can't find a copy of the one that I've already had.
Yeah.
All the versions of it. No, the second one. See, yeah, I have a severe reaction and I die.
Yeah, that's what I was like, I'm going in order, or you think, you know what I mean?
It only
First-
first a reaction
Versus
on my
platelet.
Right,
Are you doing?
and she says, no. I'm like, I'll find a good right here.
Oh, okay. Doing numbers?
But it is that. I have to search, St. Elizabeth, I can get my husband's record and search through it for one that they gave me.
Yes, I never seen her. First thing is,
And I called them from there.
Platelet
And they told me that
Oh, I just put it up there, you just said,
oh, okay. Yeah, sure, yeah, she's been like, yeah.
It's been a while.
So
That. It's like, 'cause
You've never
in
heard
all,
of
like,
it.
Yeah, you're just
just different
like,
things.
you were doing
I've got school every day.
not in it, it's in the cap that they plug the container with. That you have to stick the needle through. It took me like an hour. An argument.
My dad has atrocious
Find one.
Okay, we ready?
No.
Oh, yeah. They got the fun one. And don't worry, you guys have the hardest one. You'll get out.
My handwriting's terrible. I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, I have the worst. So. Not gonna get any complaints from me.
I'm just a pretty, I'm just a guy, so my dad, my brother, his signature is. Seriously, that's my brother's signature.
Signatures.
No, that's it.
Well, I did my parents, but I never did my siblings. That wasn't gonna help me.
I can still sign my mom's name, I can never business.
Yeah, like
Oh, I had
every
that down pat.
Yeah, I sent my mom's names on all the checks, so it's like, if she ever
That's
gets my
complete
check,
irony.
just like,
That's all I had. That's all I had. What is the again?
up to the point that I sent my boyfriend's name on like when he pays for dinner or whatever, I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
"Here,
It's sometimes good when you pair up and then someone might remember
We're
something
only
you
3
can't
years in,
remember.
but-
Yeah, that's always helpful.
Yeah. Number 5 was, 65, I then 5.
My name on his card.
I did that one, so.
Totally different. They didn't realize that. Long last name, different letters, legally, like,
Obviously a female.
yeah.
Oh well, if he's not making play, we're not.
Yeah. This song by default.
And really, that's why you have to say about secondary.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I missed something.
Because that's when it releases that, I mean, it becomes the best platelet plug it can be, or the platelet to platelet. Okay, let's start with 1. And what we'll do, you guys, is if we want to add something, we'll add it and they can write it on. So we won't take anything off till we've added if we need to add anything. Okay, number 1, what are key functions of the vessels?
Alright, vasoconstriction,
And what's that mean?
like closes up as
Okay.
it gets smaller. And then, it diverts blood flow away from the injury, activates ADP and, VWF, which has to do with the platelets. And then activates clotting factor 3, which is vessels.
Okay, so what activates the platelet? What is released? What'd you say? Did you have ADP? Then the other 2 things are released from the damaged vessel. They're not activated from the vessel.
Okay, so the von Willebrand's factor is released.
Released
Okay,
when the vessel is damaged.
and then
But
clot
factor
3 is
3
also released.
is released
Okay.
from the damaged vessel. So ADP, when it's released, is what activates the platelet to start thinking, hey, we gotta take action. And then tell me, what, we'll continue, number 2. What are key substances released from the vessel? So there's 2 new ones. What are the 2 of the same?
The VWF, I don't know what I M, and the factor 3.
Okay,
And the new ones are the TPA and the ADP.
okay. So what's VWF bind to? It won't hurt us to review.
Glycoprotein 1B.
Okay, and it does platelet to
Vessel.
vessel. Okay, what does factor 3 do? And you've been doing that in lab.
Activates the clotting factors.
Extrinsic clotting system forms the fibrin clot. That's our protein. We provide factor 3. Okay, and then what does ADPase do?
It breaks down ADP. It breaks down the fibrin clot.
Well, it breaks down.
It stops the formation of ADP so that
So-
the platelets stop going.
Right. So it keeps the platelet activation in check. It only does when platelets are needed. It doesn't keep activating more and more platelets. And then what's TPA do? I mean, there's always help.
Plasminogen activates the release of plasmin.
Yep. That is our 4th system we'll talk about. Once you have a fibrin clot, you gotta break it down, because what do we want? Smooth, continuous blood flow. So remember, you gotta know all your systems, how they work together. Okay, number 3, what are 3 characteristics of your platelets?
There's 150,000, 400,000 per cubic millimeter.
Okay,
They recycle every 9 to 12 days, and they're discoid shaped, which is yam or football shaped.
right. So when they get activated, they're gonna shape change to more circular and line up the organelles. Okay? Number 4, 3 zones and their other name.
The first one is the peripheral region, also known as the transmitter region. Number 2 is the sol gel, also known as cytoskeletal region. And number 3 is the organelle, also known as the metabolic region.
Okay? So the key thing, you gotta get to those granules in the metabolic region. That really is the whole key to good platelet function. And number 5,
The first zone is the peripheral, and it aids in platelet to von Willebrand factor from damaged vessels through GPIV.
okay?
And then it also aids in platelet to platelet interaction from through GPA2B and GP3A.
Okay? So those are the 3 glycoproteins. What are the 2, now you learn 2 systems. One releases stuff to the circulation, a canal that's in this region. OCS, open canalicular system. And one system helps to release the calcium that are in the granules called the DTS, dense tubular system. Makes sense. Dense granules, dense tubular system, dense granules have calcium. Okay, next one.
Is it has to pronounce sol
Gel.
it changes shape from a disc form to a round. It's known as the cytoskeletal region. It's more of a cytoskeletal structure. It's got a contractual region, it's also known as, and it releases granules.
That is its key function. You gotta get those granules out. Okay?
Then we also have the organelle. It is a metabolic region. It contains alpha granules, which contains the VWF, and it contains factor 5 and factor 1. Then we have the dense granules, which contain ADP, ATP, and calcium, which is blood.
And I forgot to ask you, what is the most numerous? You gotta know this, because I've seen those at registered question. Which is the most numerous granule per platelet? Alpha, anybody know? 20 to 200. And what about, how many per platelet the dense?
2 to 10.
So write those up there.
What was alpha again? I'm sorry.
20 to 200, and then 2 to 10. Okay, the 5 steps.
Okay, first step is adhesion. It involves VWF, and then that's on the vessel side. And then it binds with GP1B on the platelet side.
Okay,
And then, second is primary aggregation, which, allows GP2B and GP3A to bind to calcium and fibrinogen.
and what are they doing? If that's platelet to vessel, what are they doing now in that step?
Platelet to platelet.
Yes.
And then the, I don't know if I spelled that right, thromboxane A2, so TXA2.
And so that's the second thing. You only have to put one on your test. Either of those, okay? So you can put the formation and what's its job and what's its key enzyme. Cyclooxygenase. And what is it, the job of TXA2? The next step.
Oh.
I was saying releases something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the formation triggers the release reaction,
Release.
and the key enzyme is cyclooxygenase. And if you take aspirin, it can't do this. You're never gonna have a release reaction. So you're gonna have poor primary hemostasis if you're on aspirin, long term. Okay? Step 3.
So then the third step is called the release reaction. It releases alpha and dense granules. And then it also, the platelet factor 3 is exposed on the membrane.
So remember, there's probably at least 7 platelet factors. 2, I'm gonna key into PF3 because that becomes the hallmark of how the fibrin clot joins the platelet plug. So if you had your factor 3 form a fibrin clot with the extrinsic factors, it's going to join the platelet plug by way of PF3. That clot is going to come hooked to it because that got exposed, okay?
And then the fourth step is secondary aggregation, which it just allows more complete aggregation of granules for more platelet to platelet.
This is where it's a good platelet to platelet interaction. At step 2, that platelet is going to dissolve. They're not going to stay hooked together if you don't ever get to the release reaction. So that's all you got to say on your test is more and complete platelet to platelet aggregation, okay? And the last step.
The last step is stabilization of the platelet plug. Platelet factor 3 has the platelet join the fibrin clot.
Yep, it's kind of like the PF3 is a way for the fibrin clot to come in like glue on the platelet plug and make it firm and stabilized, where you won't start bleeding, okay? The whole key thing is we're building the clot to stop the damaged vessel from bleeding. And once we get that done, once we get through the next system, then we're going to come in and break it down with our fourth system that involved the plasminogen to plasmin. Because remember, ultimately, smooth, continuous blood flow. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to go over, it's in your syllabus, I'm going to teach you the clotting factor names. And this will be the last piece on your test. And I'll keep these up in case you want to write anything before you leave. But this is going to be on test 1. It's on page 31. Looks like this. And this way we'll have time to practice them this week. Because I can ask you real quickly in lab before we start. Some of them kind of give you a hint too, which ones get called by which one most commonly. And then we'll be done. Because you gotta know them interchangeably. I don't know if it'll help if I. Because what happens in registry questions, you might get the name or you might get the number in a question, and you gotta know them. You gotta know it back and forth what that means. So fibrinogen is factor 1. There's no really other name. Most of the time, you're gonna see it referred to as fibrinogen and not factor 1. Factor 2 is called prothrombin. And most of the time, you're going to see it referred to as prothrombin. You tell me what factor 3 is. Tissue. Sometimes you see it called tissue factor. But tissue thromboplastin is factor 3. And most of the time, 4, you only see it written as Ca++. I don't have you diagram as factor 4. It'll just be in key places. So that one is something that's required in both systems, but you don't diagram it as one of the factors in each system. Yes,
You don't mean anything different by the plus plus, just in the
just
charge,
that's it.
just the charge, right?
It's, yeah,
Okay.
it's calcium.
Got it.
5 is labile. What do we mean by labile? What do you know from the term labile? It degrades or breaks down easily. So one of the reasons you have to run protimes within 2 hours, because factors 5 and 8 are very unstable, and they will degrade or break down and affect your test results. And if you notice, I don't put a 6 in there. If it helps you to put 6 is unassigned. I don't know why they skipped it. Stable. 7 is the key factor in the protime, and it's very, doesn't degrade or break down easily. It's very stable. 8 has 2 names. It is your main hemophilia. It refers to hemophilia A. And it's also very labile. If that helps you to write hemophilia, that's what I mean by the heme. Hemophilia B is factor 9, and they call it Christmas factor. For some reason, this is the one factor students get really quickly. I don't know why. And I don't really know why it's called Christmas disease. Factor 10 must be the people who discovered it. It's called Stuart Prower. Hemophilia C, this is my hardest. Plasma, thromboplastin, antecedent. So PTA, I'm not really sure how I got that name, other than it precedes, when you're in the intrinsic system, it precedes factor 9 and 8, which are key pieces. So maybe that's what it means by plasma thromboplastin precursor, whereas 3 is tissue thromboplastin in the protime. There are 2 names for 12, contact and integument, so you need to know both. Factor 13 is fibrin stabilizing factor. What I like about that, it tells you its job. When we diagram next week for test 2, I'll show you how it comes in and stabilizes the fibrin clot. The key question I see on registries on 13, it does not form the clot. It comes when the clot is formed and stabilize it. And that's how they try to get you. Because they'll have a normal protime and PTT. And then precalagrin is called the Fletcher factor. These are part of your minor system that we'll get to in another lecture, but they have a role in activating factor 12. So I'm gonna show you how our lab work goes with all this. So let's review them, and then I'm gonna show you on the board before we leave how you know a lot just from the 2 tests we'll do this week and last week. And I'm gonna go ahead and erase this side. Okay, factor 1, let's just repeat them as best, and you can look at your thing, is fibrinogen. Factor 2 is prothrombin. And when I make you a diagram next week, sometimes the names kind of fit better when you see them diagrammed out. Last, factor 3, at least you know that one. Or it could be sometimes tissue factor, plaster, factor 4. Calcium. Factor 5 breaks down. Labile. Factor 6. Stable. 6 unassigned. Factor 7. Stable. Factor 8, 2 names, and it's the main hemophilia. There's hemophilia A, B, and C we'll learn about. And A is your missing factor 8. Hemophilia B is Christmas disease, you're missing factor 9. Hemophilia C is your missing factor 11. A is the most predominant one, like 1 in 10,000. And it's usually sex-linked. The mom passes it to the male child. Okay, so anti-hemophilic and labile. It doesn't last long either. And then you have factor 9, Christmas. Factor 10, I don't know what to help you remember that one. Stewart Prower. Factor 11, when we start diagramming, you'll see 12 affects 11, affects 9, affects 8. So if 3 is involved with tissue thromboplastin, 12 and 11 will be the formation of plasma thromboplastin. So they call that plasma thromboplastin antecedent, like a precursor. And then 12, both names you gotta know. Because 12 is the key factor, contact, or the person who discovered it, Hageman. 13, that is its job. Fibrin stabilizing factor. It does not form the clot. So I'll show you on test results what will happen. And then when we get to one of the minor systems, 2 of the factors that you gotta know are prekallikrein and HMWK, high molecular weight. And I remember my registry had 2 questions and they used Fletcher and Fitzgerald. So I had to know that was prekallikrein and kallikrein. And I had 2 questions using those factors. I thought, that's crazy, you hardly get any coag on your test, and I had 2. Okay, let's show you what you know already just from lab. You've done a proton. What factors are involved with the proton? Remember the common? Okay. It helps you to write them both ways until you get them down. Would you ever be deficient in 3 and why? It's in your tissues and it's your reagent. The test procedure provides 3. And this will make more sense when we show you tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to do a PTT. It's called partial thromboplastin time. Sometimes people say APTT, and all that is activated partial thromboplastin time. Does anybody remember what PT stands for? Protime or prothrombin time. Or you might just see it as PT. PTT is partial thromboplastin time. And if you ever see it as APTT, it just means activated for the A. And the factors this one monitors is 12, 11. Remember, I write them in the order they affect each other. 8, 10, 5, 2, and 1. So, if we're gonna go by these normals. Pro time normal, 10 to 13 seconds. PTT normal, 28 to 36. It's a longer acting system, so the normal time for PTTs is longer. So let's see if you can figure out what you do know already. I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, and you tell me the problem. Are they both? This is a patient. Tell me what you know based on what is on the board about those 2 results. They both normal, they both increased, they both decreased.
Normal.
Increase normal.
Okay, so this is increased. What about this one? So, what does that tell you based on what you know each system monitors the factors? Why is it not 3? That's your reagent. Why is it not 10, 5, 2, and 1? It's common. So shouldn't have the PTT been elevated too? You know a lot already after week 2. When we're done with lab this week. So that dotted line, those are the common factors. Okay, so this one we know is factor 7. So this is called, down the road, we'll get even more detailed into this. It's called a substitution or mixing study. And my students all have to know it, so it sets you apart. Okay? The next patient is, now tell me what you know. What's the pro time?
Normal.
What's the PTT?
Increased.
Now, what do you know?
Factor 8.
Down to those 4, right?
Yeah.
Why wasn't it 10, 5, 2, and 1?
Because they're
They're common and the pro time was normal. So it has to be something only in the intrinsic system. Okay? And the last scenario is now what do you know?
Something's on
Everybody see they're both increased? Now it has to be common between the 2 systems. If you can understand those 3 examples, you're gonna do that every day when you work coag. Because these are the most 2 common tests you do, is your pro time and PTT. So if you learn your factors, you can have it down to 4 factors just on the pro time and PTT. And I'll teach you also, the first thing we question when we have elevated pro time and PTT is what anticoagulant are they on? Many times people are on Coumadin, and Coumadin acts on factor 7 because it needs vitamin K, and Coumadin attacks vitamin K. And people who are on heparin, it'll affect all systems. And I'll teach you, this will affect both systems too. But the first system is 7, and the first system heparin affects is the PTT. So when I would be working and I got elevated pro time and PTT, I wouldn't automatically think, oh my gosh, they got a factor deficiency. I'd see, do they have anywhere written if they're on Coumadin or heparin? Probably on pro times, 90% of your pro times that are abnormal are going to be because they're on Coumadin and they're monitoring that therapy. And if you're in a hospitalized setting, heparin is very common for the patient to be on until Coumadin gets to the level it needs to be. So the first thing you ask before you worry that you're missing a factor is, are you on an anticoagulant? Whether you call the nursing floor, whether you call the emergency room, like I told you, I had one, my ProTime and PTT were greater than 100. And that might happen on my PTT, but my ProTimes rarely did that. It was an ER person. I called over there, they said, no, we haven't given them any heparin. So I went to the blood drawer and said, is there anything you can tell me you did? Because I'm gonna have to have it redrawn. These don't make sense. Oh, I poured over from a red top to the blue before it clotted. So thank God I thought to ask. I didn't report them, and we had it redrawn. But if there's a clot activator or it is glass, you're gonna use up those clotting factors even if you don't visually see the clot yet. So you know a lot if you know your factors. And the clue for next week, because we're gonna diagram, in a test 2, you got a diagram. That's part of the question. If you learn them in the order they affect each other. I'll show you how they come together. Okay. So tomorrow, inside, we'll do, I think the 7 of you will do the start 4 and look over your procedure. I mean, who knows, maybe we'll get further than I think. And outside people, there'll be 6 of you, we'll do the PTTs on the MLA. If we get more done than I think, then we'll swap. If not, then on Thursday, we'll swap. The other people who didn't do the start 4 will do the start 4, and the other people will do that. So everybody should do both PTT procedures by the end of this week. That's probably the hardest test to have a lot of people in the room. So we'll try to make that our goal. If we get one machine done tomorrow, that'll be good. Thank you, guys. Yes. And anybody have questions, I'm more than happy on anything. I know there's a lot of theory that you haven't had much exposure.